Hey, well, what's up, Colliders? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about a film that I've been looking forward to checking out for a while. The personal history of David Copperfield, based on the beloved classic by Charles Dickens. So let's talk about it. So, like I said, this is a movie that I've actually been looking forward to checking out for a while. It actually officially came out in 2019, so it might seem kind of odd to be just now reviewing it, but it's kind of had a long history of release, kind of a slow rollout. Came out kind of limited release over in Europe, kind of more for the prestige festivals, and kind of slowly been coming out. I think it hit in the States in last August, but obviously in the middle of COVID and the pandemic and all the craziness, it had a kind of a limited, short, kind of overlooked life within theaters. But just a couple weeks ago, it finally came out on home video. So I'm expecting that a lot of you guys like me will probably just now be getting the chance to check out this film that's been out for a while. And again, like I said, this is kind of another adaptation of a Charles Dickens work. And kind of to show full disclosure up front, I love Charles Dickens. I love classic literature. I was an English major in college, and David Copperfield, and besides this being my favorite Dickens book, it's probably one of my top two or three favorite books of all time. I just adore the original source material of this. And again, I'm not alone. This is one of his most popular books. Dickens himself referred to this, David Copperfield, as sort of his favorite child. It was sort of the author's favorite of all of his classic works as well. So again, anytime you come into to review an adaptation, kind of trying to be objective about it, it's impossible to get past the fact that this is based on a story that I am very familiar with and that I love and have very fond kind of attachments to it. And again, it's kind of coming at it that way. It's always kind of a double-edged sword. It's not always bad. On the one hand, there are definitely moments, as we'll get into, things that were cut or maybe not given as much focus in the movie as in the book, where because I was able to kind of fill in the gaps and kind of supplement it with my own knowledge of the original material, I found there were some scenes that I was able to really enjoy in the movie and kind of that resonated a lot more with me, knowing more about the characters, as opposed to my wife, who's never read the books. I didn't know anything about the story, and some of those moments fell flat for her because she didn't have that attachment to the characters, didn't know some of the backstory behind it. So I think in that way it's a positive. On the other hand, kind of inevitably there's also the temptation to kind of sit back and be like, oh, it was better in the book, and kind of to resent the fact that some of your favorite parts were cut out. And again, probably my favorite scene in the whole book revolves around David kind of in his younger years going back to his home with his mother and with Peggotty as kind of caretaker, and sort of this kind of peaceful, subdued moment, sort of this last class of his innocent childhood before all is sort of ruined. And as he learns that you can't go back, you can't kind of hold on to it. In the end, you have to keep moving forward. And some of those scenes were cut out, and I think to the detriment of the story. But again, that's probably the best place to start talking about this review. In the end, I think this movie it's okay. It definitely isn't isn't a classic like the book was. I think it's, in some ways, it will be kind of a crowd pleaser. It's a feel-good story, but I think because of the limited time restrictions of a 2-hour movie, as opposed to a 1,000-page kind of slowly paced, developed novel, it's going to be a very different story. So again, I think approaching this movie is not necessarily just coming at it like, oh, well, the book was better. If we can't ever beat the book, it's that these are two very different stories, and I think part of what makes the book so great is the fact that it is very kind of slow paced. It really kind of follows David throughout his whole life. The theme of it is just kind of life's a marathon. There's peaks and there's valleys, but you kind of keep pushing on, kind of in the space between, kind of hoping for better, trying to do your best in this world, better yourself. Where in contrast, you can do that with a 1,000-page novel. With a 2-hour movie, the theme becomes more, life's a sprint. This movie is this rapid pace. Events kind of just happen one after each other. A big tragedy will happen in David's life, but hey, don't worry about it. By that afternoon, by that evening, a big victory will happen, something great will happen, or David finally achieves something in the movie. But it's, don't celebrate too much because the next day there's going to be some big tragedy in your life. And when you kind of miss in the book some of the 300 pages that separate those moments, that kind of make the victories feel earned and the tragedies feel kind of more severe and more bigger obstacles to overcome. When it's so rapid fire, a rapid pace, you kind of miss that. It becomes sort of a series of events. And I found this as David's character, he becomes almost a lot more passive, where kind of life and events just happen to him. He's sort of on this roller coaster going back and forth and being whisked along life, kind of out of his control. Where that is true in just life in general, and that's true in the novel. But you get more of a sense of in the novel that David, he's an active player in this. He's a character. He's pushing himself forward. He's kind of working towards goals. You miss that in the movie where it's so rapid fire that a lot of the more kind of dramatic, bigger moments, at least to me, end up kind of falling flat a bit. That there's just not enough build up. You don't see him struggling enough or working toward it to make it feel like a big earned payoff moment. Is this sort of, okay, here's the next event, moment of his life. Now we got to get on. We got to fit all this stuff in. So again, the rushed nature isn't necessarily that I'm mad that they changed the book. It's just that I think the story itself was designed to be more of a longer marathon thing. And the transition to a more fast-paced story just doesn't serve it quite as well. But to be clear, this is not a case of a director and a scriptwriter that is just sort of butchering, coming with a machete and cutting this book apart. This is very much made with love for the source material. It's not the movie's fault that it's only 2 hours to tell the story. That's just sort of an inevitable part of switching mediums. But there is a lot of, again, if you enjoy the book or if you're not familiar with the book, there's a lot of this kind of loving homages and odes to the source material. A lot of fresh and this sort of creative ways to tell the story. Again, this is the book and the movie are both kind of the premise of it is that David Copperfield is reflecting on his life at a later point and kind of unpacking his own personal history. And again, in the book, you have David as the narrator, and the movie does some interesting stuff with that, where he's also narrating the movie in some ways, and they come up with some neat ways to kind of do that with where you have moments where an adult David Copperfield is kind of giving encouragement, kind of looking back on a child David Copperfield, and there's a scene in the book where David's in love with Dora. And as the book kind of describes, everywhere he looks, he sees Dora, and the way that they transfer that onto the screen is hilarious, and it's creative, and it's definitely showing that this is a labor of love, and a lot of the issues that I had with the story itself are just a product of the fact that it only had 2 hours to tell the story. Again, another approaching this as a Christian, Charles Dickens was very much through all of his works influenced by his belief in God, his faith, influenced by scripture. There's always a lot of scripture references, and again, in the movie you don't get that kind of overtly, but you definitely get that in some of the themes. I think again, not quite as powerfully or potently as you do in the book because there's not as much time. But this is a movie that is very much kind of a celebration of good. It looks at tragedy. There's hardships that David overcomes, but in the end, this is sort of a movie where you find yourself just cheering for David to overcome the odds and to, kind of despite his down and out kind of upbringing and some of the how the cards have been played against him, you are cheering for kind of good and nobility and morality and all those things, kind of virtue to win out in the end. Again, this is kind of a movie that ends happily, even more with some pretty drastic changes from the book to have it be even more kind of happy. And I guess that's how I kind of describe this whole movie. This is sort of a more fluffy version of Charles Dickens. Dickens, he's always witty, he's always humorous and funny and clever. But again, he also deals with some very, real gritty, grim realities of life, and kind of the poor classes and poverty, and deals with all of those. And the movie, in a lot of ways, kind of skims all the quirkiness, all the fun aspects of the book, kind of off the surface, and then kind of just gives you that. And again, there are some moments of more kind of serious drama, especially like when when Copperfield is a child and being kind of beaten by his cruel stepfather, Mr. Murdstone. You have some moments of that, but for the most part, this is less like a drama and more just a quirky kind of artsy comedy. I think the story works better as with the more dramatic moments. But if you're just wanting a film that kind of makes you laugh, that just sort of has some crazy characters, real zany comedy, again, very kind of British comedy, which again, I eat that kind of stuff up, then I think this film does work. Again, all the actors are doing a good job. All the storytelling, it's a very competently made film, even if the story itself doesn't necessarily soar as it could. One last point that I think is relevant, speaking of the actors and the characters, this is a film that kind of adopted a colorblind casting approach. And again, this is different than kind of mandating that 20% of the actors have to be in this kind of class and 20% have to have this skin color. It's more just, hey, we just cast the movie without any kind of restriction on who can play what role. So you have family, a mother, parents and their son that are completely different skin colors, nothing, very different ethnicities. And again, I think in the end, this might just come down to personal preference. But for me, I found it really quite distracting to, some of the realism I thought got lost, and it had because of the colorblind way that they did it, it kind of came across more. It had like a theatrical vibe. Again, you kind of see this stuff happen in kind of live theater, where it's clearly just actors from different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and they're just playing a part on stage. And you kind of get that with this, with the movie, and that in some ways that works, but I think because it felt more theatrical, more live theater, there's more of a kind of a wall at a distance between just sort of immersing yourself into the story, and I found it more kind of less, hey, these are real people going through real issues, and I'm very invested. It became more kind of blatant that, hey, these are actors that are performing a story by Charles Dickens. And I think some of the believability and consistency gets lost. And again, I have no problem with changing the ethnicities of the book characters, if they want to do that. It's more the kind of how consistently they do that kind of in a more realistic way, which I found, again, I think some people will be bothered by it. Some people won't be bothered by it. Some people will love it. Some people won't. But again, it's worth noting. But in the end, I think this is in some ways it let me down. It wasn't as good. And I don't know if that's just because I had unrealistic expectations based on how much I love the original novel. I watched this with my wife who doesn't know the novel, and she hated this film. She found it just crazy, quirky, hard to follow. But again, I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I think it's fine if you just want a zany, fun, quirky comedy with some kind of interesting, filmmaking and ways that they're telling the story. But I think just sort of as a story, this movie I don't think will resonate with people in the same way. It won't be as kind of inspirational or kind of draw people in the way that something like the book did when you really got to know these characters and know the journey that they're on. Because again, this film just moves too fast, and too many kind of life lessons are all happening at the same time, and they kind of condense even just distinct periods of his life in the book are all squashed together and happening simultaneously, and it becomes just a bit jarring to keep up with sort of how are we supposed to be, what is his challenge right now he's overcoming, because it's less linear than it would be in the book. But hey, if you guys are finally getting a chance to check out this film, or whether you maybe caught it in theaters when it came up, but just haven't had a chance to talk about it, I'd love to hear what you guys thought. Did you guys enjoy this film? Did you find it funny? If you've read the book, were you satisfied with the way that they with limited restrictions and that they could do? Were you satisfied with how they kind of brought it to to screen, or did you feel that, hey, maybe it's best just to let this book live on as words on the page? Whatever you guys think, I'd love to hear from you guys. Again, if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our channel. Keep up with all the videos we're doing. Again, we have, if you guys don't join us, we do a live stream. Me and my co-pilot Sam Camp, every Tuesday at noon, we do a live stream breaking down what's kind of the latest in pop culture and kind of as Christians, how should we engage in this. So I encourage you guys, if you guys never checked that out, we'd love for you to join us and jump in the comment section. Make sure you like this video, guys, and stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.